Hi everyone, I'm Lyn OGrady. Thank you very much for joining this session titled How Can We Effectively Support Parents of Suicidal Kids? I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future of all the countries where people are joining me from for this presentation. I'd also like to remember people we've lost to death by suicide and those continuing to experience the loss. In this very short presentation, I'm going to spend some time talking about the importance of recognising suicidality and the risk of suicide in children and young people and finding ways to hear and respond to their distress. Understand parents' responses when we're sharing news about concerns in relation to the risk and partnering with parents to keep their child safe and feeling supported, and really picking up on that idea that it takes a village. As always, when I'm talking about suicide prevention, it's important that we also do take good care of ourselves during and after the sessions. So I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on that and what that might mean for you. And then I'll launch right into it, I guess, in terms of why this topic, why my interest in this area that I've had now for quite a while. So this is the latest data that comes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. This is released every year and it's just been released very recently. And you can see there it's the data for the calendar year of 2019, and it's for children aged 5 to 17 years. And you can see across the years since 2015 that it's remained fairly constant, I guess, across that time. And just to, I guess, pick up on that, 96 recorded suicides in that year, in 2019. Suicide remaining the leading cause of death of children in Australia. Child suicide rate for males was 3 per 100,000 and females 1.7. 80% of those deaths occurred between the ages of 15 to 17, and Northern Territory reported the highest rates of child suicide deaths. So that fits with Torres Strait Islander people being more at risk of dying from suicide. So a lot of that is consistent with adults for us in terms of the gender differences and the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. There's a link if people are interested in reading a little bit more about that. I guess that's one of the reasons why I took an interest in this topic, when I could see this data and the fact that children and young people were continuing to die of suicide. So this is a book that I've had published and has just been released this year in April of 2020. And this is the first part of it, understanding parenting and suicide. And then the second part is much more practical. So parenting a teenager who is suicidal. And I'm going to be picking up on some of these points today in this presentation. One of the triggers, I guess, for me, or one of the drivers for me to do write that book was when 13 Reasons Why came out. I'm sure people will be familiar with that. It's a few years ago now. And there are a lot of concerns raised about 13 Reasons Why. It was based on a novel that has been written decades before, and it had a series of events that led to Hannah, the protagonist in the series, dying of suicide at the end of the series. And a number of risk factors and warning signs came throughout the series. Parents were really had different responses. Some parents were quite shocked by it, and other parents saw it as an opportunity to get information and to start to really better understand what their kids were going through and what their kids needed, and wanting more resources to help them to find out more. So in Australia, we had lots of response from organisations like Headspace, who put together resources for parents and for schools. And in America, Netflix did commission this research to have a look at it. And in many ways, the whole series did follow this kind of model in terms of risk factors for adolescent self-harm and suicide from 2012, where we had some negative life events and social problems, had some personality factors, and this severe distress and hopelessness that led to this need to alleviate the pain, and suicide ideation and came into play. So it kind of brought to life, I guess, some of these models, some of these theories. The other driver for me was the Your Town Kids Helpline research that was released in 2016. And you can see there that this talks about children and young people, breaks it up into 14 years and younger, and the 15 to 19 age range. So this is, I think, really important when you think about deaths maybe happening. Most of the deaths are happening in that 15 to 18, 19 age range. But in terms of calls to Kids Helpline and the level of distress in younger children, this really highlights that. You can see there the question around, have you ever made a plan or attempted suicide? You can see there that the children that rang through and were included in this research, 82% of them had made a suicide plan and 54% of them had attempted suicide, which is very similar to the older age group. The other box there that talks about receiving help when you were thinking about suicide, you can see there that the children under 14 received less help, less likely to get help when thinking about suicide and reaching out to people. I guess this was another driver for me in terms of the need for us to become more aware of this and as a community to really be able to understand this and recognise it as a real concern. Parents and friends always stand out, I guess, in terms of important people in the lives of children and young people, and that was the case here as well. So you can see there that parents stood out for both of those groups. The older group, friends, were slightly higher, but still there, school staff were there as well. And obviously older people, the 15 to 19 age group, had more options about being able to access family doctors and perhaps access psychologists for themselves or Headspace. They were able to access that more, or parents taking it more seriously perhaps. So this again was another driver for me in terms of what's important. There's been little study on risk factors in children and young people, so a lot of it has come from some studies that have been done, but also, I guess, extrapolated from what we know from adults, which may or may not be helpful. You can see some list of fairly standard things there. We're certainly thinking about individuals and family factors. So children are very sensitive to changes and stress in families, and the conflicts and the parenting style just have an impact on, certainly on children's mental health and in terms of suicide as well. Peers, relationships, bullying. We hear a lot about bullying and we hear a lot about cyberbullying, which are often more connected than they appear to be. And school issues, so real and perceived school issues, academic difficulties as well as disciplinary problems, and these life events, so changes, trauma, abuse and neglect, all of those sort of life factors, adverse child effects of childhood, adverse events that have happened are really there, but also things like moving, transition from primary to high school, transitions in terms of changing schools, moving away from where children have grown up or communities that they're new in. Warning signs, again, it's really difficult to know what they might be. We can extrapolate from adults, but may not necessarily apply. So the research is really not there to help us with that, but we certainly be wanting to look out for these. They may be there. Recent research that came out just in the last month or so is really looking at, can it actually happen without warning in children and young people? So this research looked in the UK. It looked over the last 3 years of data, 2014, 2016, suicide in people aged 10 to 19. And you can see there that they summarise around a third had no known history of suicidal ideas or self-harm. We've also had low rates of other risk factors for suicide, including substance misuse, mental health diagnosis, recent adverse life events, and contact with services. So it's something for us to be really aware of, that future suicide prevention cannot rely on explicit expressions of risk when we're talking about children and young people. The impact on families is something we really need to be thinking about, and when we do talk to families and share information, they may be experiencing a whole lot of these concerns. So this is some research that looked at it, the experiences of parents of suicidal young people, and you can see there are a whole lot of experiences. The family experiences their child's first suicide attempt in a way resembling the young person's experience. A smaller study that was done in 2012 where the parents talked about the experience of parenting with suicidal teenagers, a double trauma, the trauma of the suicide attempt and the accompanying impact on a family's wellbeing. This is a quote from that study. "It was me who brought her into the world, me who formed her, and it was me who let her down. It was more or less my fault that she got so far out as to try suicide." We do know that there are some protective factors. Again, there's very little research that support this, but these are fairly standard protective factors that we do know about in terms of mental health, and that we can then include in terms of protecting children from suicide. Strong family relationships characterised by warmth and support, absence of abuse, or the identification, early treatment of abused children. Early identification and treatment of children with psychological disorders, particularly depression, and post-intervention efforts to reduce contagion following suicide, and information being made widely available so that this reduces the risk of adults dismissing early warning signs due to the intuitive inconsistency between children and suicide. So this is becoming more and more important, I think, that UK research. We know that there are points of intervention that we need to be looking out for as adults, thinking about children and young people, and this is a model that helps us to see that there's the observed behaviour that might become above the line, but a lot of it can be happening under that observed line. So non-observed behaviour can be happening there. And this is a small research study of young adults who had been hospitalised after a suicide attempt, and they were interviewed about who was hearing and how supported were they when they were in that emotional pain. And you can see there that for some of them that was they didn't speak about their pain and no one heard them. They sometimes spoke, but it wasn't heard. It could be spoken and heard, or it could be unspoken but still heard, which I think for again with younger children that's about. In the book, I do talk about the importance of families. I think that as children become teenagers, it can be easy for parents to feel like they don't play a role. So I've really tried to reinforce that, and that's taken from my own doctoral research from over 10 years ago. Considerations for supporting family members: we need to recognise the distress and how that may manifest. So it can be denial or anger because of the shock and because of the stress that they're under. We need to look at how we can support parents to recognise the need for support and use a safety plan to help to play a role in that and to promote safety, the idea of safety, looking out for potential risk factors and warning signs, and really use the safety plan to help do that and know what their role is. Recognise also they may be part of the problem, but also part of the solution. If there's child protection issues, obviously we need to respond in a way that's appropriate, and assisting them to seek support for themselves. Things like family dinners can be really important. There's research that does support that we don't have to do big things. We can do some small things. But we do need to know as parents what to actually do when things escalate. So this is a table from the book as well that does talk about the sorts of behaviour that might happen, and then what to do when I've got different levels of concern in the book. Safety planning is the best evidence-based approach we have. At the moment, safety planning plus some extra support in between appointments, perhaps with a mental health professional. But safety planning is something that we can do as a very brief intervention, but a very ongoing as well. Ongoing intervention can be something that the young person makes their own. That's the template from the original 2008 version of that. Important that we do cover off on all of those. So if you've got templates that you use that miss some of those things, it's good to go back to it. We also need to all work together. So this is another section from the book where we have parents and professionals working together, and some questions that parents might like to ask health professionals if they are thinking about getting some support. And also to really build the communication and keep that communication going with the young person. So there's some suggestions of questions as well to open up this discussion. In terms of work we might do with families, there's a lot of psychoeducation work, I think. Family mediation might be required, parenting, skill development, parental self-care, as I've mentioned, managing the risk and really taking it seriously. But being confident and assertive in terms of what they can do, and certainly support with return to school planning and monitoring if that's useful. During times of crisis or stress, small things can make a difference, and this may be the focus as much as making major changes. Although there's still much to learn about suicidality and adolescent behaviours, we know enough about the importance of effective communication, the value of strong and trusting relationships to be able to act on those to improve the family situation. Being there to listen and problem solve sound too simple for complex problems, but they can be the very things that kids need when they're struggling. That's the last few words in the book. Here's some references, further reading. That's the link for the book if anybody's interested. And this is a really useful article that came out earlier this year that really just summarises suicidality and what to do, which is really helpful. Here's some other readings that people might be interested in about young people and suicide risk that I've been involved in or written. And some Twitter accounts that I follow to keep up with latest research there. This is another document that I pulled together for Headspace in terms of understanding suicide risk in primary school age children. And here's my contact details. So it's been a very quick little bit of time together today. So please reach out if you've got questions or you want some more information about any of that. Please don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'd like to hear from you. So thanks very much, everyone, and bye.